are sick and tired of establishment politics, and they want real change.
Welcome to New Libs on the Block. I'm Andy Smith.
I'm Brion Curran.
I'm Kristi Pursell.
Hello, everybody. For another crazy week at the Minnesota House of Representatives, we are doing a special episode here on the weekend. We're recording on Sunday. This will probably drop Monday the 20th, MLK Junior Day, and also, unfortunately, the inauguration
We
of
don't
the
speak of
second
that.
Trump presidency.
Coronation.
Potentially coronation with Snoop Dogg. There's a lot to talk about there, but we have stuff closer to home that we need to update you on, particularly the Republican coup, the continued Republican coup in the Minnesota House of Representatives. And we thought, now that we have some space from when we recorded last Tuesday, which was literally the day this all started, and we were honestly shocked, we wanted to, now with some time, sit down and walk you through what happened, even like day by day, so that hopefully you, our listeners, can better understand what an affront this is to you, the Minnesota voters, and what we plan to do about it, and how we believe, in the words of Melissa Hortman, that we will fight and we will win this fight.
That's right.
Let's start with last Tuesday. Brion, I'm going to kick it to you. We talked a little bit on our last episode about what happened, but we wanted, again, to give some clarity now with some days behind us. Brion, what happened on Tuesday?
So on Tuesday, January 14th, as subscribed by the Minnesota State Constitution, that was the first day of the 94th legislature. Now, what happened on the first day or didn't happen is currently in debate and involved in Minnesota Supreme Court cases. The basic gist of it is Democrats, following the Constitution, understand that we require 68 members to be present for quorum in order for session to continue. There were 67 members present in the chamber, all Republicans. Secretary of State Steve Simon, who presides over the first day of session until a president's elected, or until a speaker's elected, adjourned, saying no quorum, we're done. Republicans then got up and started their thing. And I don't know if somebody else wants to take it from here.
Just Cliff Notes version, quorum is legislative speak for there's enough people here to correctly represent the majority of Minnesotans in our decisions. That's why it's in the Constitution, because it's very important to say enough people are here that represent the majority of Minnesotans. So by saying there isn't a quorum, that is a fancy way of saying there isn't enough representatives here to represent the will of the people of Minnesota, which is why we can't do business, because that's where our power comes from.
And that's true, like on a lot of boards and things like that. Quorum will be stipulated as it is in our state constitution. It's 50% of the body plus one. So we have 134 members. So 50% of the body is 67. And one more than that is, in fact, 68. And we're going to get to the court challenges to that definition of quorum at the end of this episode.
And listen, it's tough when the law and courts rules against you, but I think the responsible thing to do would be to follow the laws and orders and courts of our state and our country. Brion, is that what the Republicans did?
So we've got a couple different cases that are going on and being discussed here. You know, on the one hand, we have the case of a special election in AB, which I think we'll get to here in a minute. And we had some results in that case. The maybe bigger picture here is the court case that involved the election in Shakopee, Minnesota, with the election of Representative Brad Tabke. The court ruled, the final determination in the courts, that Brad Tabke did definitively win the race based on all the facts presented. Republicans have not committed to abiding by that court ruling. So here we are stuck in a situation where Republicans have filed court cases to try to find an outcome that they would like, but at the same time saying, you know, in the state of Minnesota, the legislature gets to decide. We get to decide as legislators, not the courts, not the voters. It's us that we get to decide. But we're going to file a lawsuit in case that just gives us our way anyway. So that's the type of logic that we're dealing with here and why much of this is so difficult to follow. And so essentially right now we're at odds where Democrats are fully respecting court decisions, and the GOP just can't come through and say they're not going to kick out duly elected members. And they haven't agreed that, you know, they wouldn't continue to kick out other members beyond Brad Tabke.
Yeah. So to sketch that out, the two court cases, one of them, for lack of a better way of saying this, but simplicities, went in the way that Republicans wanted, which said that a elected member of our House, Curtis Johnson, didn't meet residency requirements.
Right.
And then another court case around Brad Tapke went the way that Democrats wanted, saying that, yes, Brad Tapke is indeed the duly elected member of that House. Now, technically, by state law, the Minnesota House of Representatives has final say over its membership. So both of those court cases are advisory to the House of how this should stand. And so in the case where the Democrats were asked to be the responsible party and abide by the court's decision, we did in fact abide. Curtis Johnson said, I will not sit in my seat because of this court case, even though he didn't have to. And we as a caucus didn't have to. We could have said, no, he's one of our members. We're doing it anyway. But we respect the rule of law. In the case where the Republicans were asked to be the responsible party and say, okay, Brad Tapke is a duly elected member, and so it's 67-67, or will be, we're not going to challenge that or try to oust him. They said, no, we're going to ignore the courts and instill rules to make sure that we can get rid of this duly elected member of the Minnesota House of Representatives purely because we don't want him in the House because it messes with our numbers.
And Brad Tapke, I mean, it helps that he's just like the most affable person in that room. I would say he and Larry Kraft are kind of duking it out for the nicest guys in the legislature.
Mm-hmm.
But he has been through hell. Not only did he win his election on election night in that contest, he won a recount, and now he has won a court case.
Mm-hmm.
And our speaker said, like, the most congratulated member of our caucus because it's the same election contest. But he has proven that, indeed, he has won 3 different times. And for our colleagues to then say, but we don't like that. And we think, because it was a close race, we think if it was a special election, we could actually try to snag that. It's undemocratic. It is unconstitutional. It is just wrong on all fronts. And that is why we can't let that stand. It's because we want to make sure that the voters of Shakopee are not disenfranchised, and the voters in the special election up in Roseville too, like, they deserve to have their representatives who they sent.
Did Ginger growl while you were saying that, by the way?
No, that was
Ginger?
Brion.
Oh, even the dogs are very upset about this anti-democratic action.
It's upsetting.
I just wanted
It's
people
so
who are
upsetting.
listening and heard a growl wanted to know, like, was that real? It is.
It's real. It's real. So, like, this is why when people are like, get to work, it's like, and what I say is, like, I can't be party to a coup. I mean, this is like illegal taking of power in our interpretation, and we will see what the court's interpretation is, hopefully by the end of this week.
So on Tuesday, the Republicans, we denied quorum, meaning we did not go into that chamber, again, saying loudly that there are not enough Minnesotans represented by people who think this is a legitimate interpretation for you to move on with this business. And that is a use of power. That is us doing our jobs based on our understanding of the laws of Minnesota and the Constitution of Minnesota. But Republicans, again, did not respect that and literally picked up a gavel and started a kangaroo court where they have been playing house in Minnesota, using taxpayer money up in St. Paul, pretending to be the House of Representatives, forcing staff to continue to work as if the House is processing when it isn't. And I think it's important to go over what they're actually doing in that sham House of Representatives, not because any of it will be legally binding. I believe that the court will rule in our favor that it is not, that they didn't have quorum, so they couldn't do any of this, but it reflects why they are doing this. And I do believe at core, the reason that they are grasping for this undemocratic power is because their agenda is anti-democratic. It's not what the people of Minnesota want. And we'll get into that a little later, but I want to talk about what they did once they had that power, specifically in the Rules Committee. And it is exactly what we just said. They passed laws that make it incredibly easy to remove a member of the Minnesota House of Representatives based solely on a plurality vote, meaning more votes, people in the House want to get rid of that member, then they can get rid of them. Which, if you're a partisan, you think about that and you're like, that's great. We could always just get rid of someone else on the other side. But step back for a minute from this particular moment, if you're a Democrat listening to this or a Republican listening to this, and think of the chaos that would come about if political parties were able to simply vote out members from a political body at will because they had more votes. Power shifts all the time in Minnesota and throughout the country. And if parties are just going to pick like the most competitive race and vote them out, that's a Minnesota we can't live in. We can't function. We can't have real representation in that kind of system.
And I mean, I think to simplify it, how I have been thinking about this and sharing this with people is, if we're truly going to be representative democracy, that means the people pick their elected officials. And if instead it's the elected officials, once we get in a room, we've got all the power, we can do whatever we want, that is no longer a democracy. And we are not showing up to respect the will of the people, the will of the voters to pick their elected officials, and not the elected officials to decide, you can be here and you can't be, when there's plenty of people I would maybe like to not have to work with or hear drone endlessly and say horrible things. But their voters voted them in, and that's who their bosses are. And we respect the institution. We respect that process, and we are not seeing that coming from the other side. And it's deeply, deeply troubling. And I think on top of that, a little dash of good old corruption. If we went back to the committees as agreed upon in the initial power sharing, I would be a member of the Rules Committee, a new committee for me. I'm kind of curious to see how the sausage gets made, and that has been one of the more interesting committees. I'm doing a quotation fingers because it's a work group. We don't think any of this is duly organized. No Democrats are in the room. But Harry Niska is running this committee with an iron fist. And
Harry Niska is the majority leader, by the way, of the Republican caucus. So he is.
The
they elected him as their leader in the Minnesota House.
Yes, so they're referring to him as majority leader. Of course, we don't believe there is a majority and a minority. We believe that there's a tie, but he's the GOP floor leader.
Let me just real quick blankly, because we're going to have to talk about this and we're going to slip up. Everything we're talking about that they did is fake. It's not real. And especially after a Supreme Court ruling soon, I think it's just going to be a sham. So everything we're talking about is not real. It's what they're playing house and doing. Just to be clear. Sorry, Kristi, go ahead.
But because those members were served with the petition that at the end of last episode, we assumed that, these concerns were going to be brought to the Minnesota Supreme Court ASAP. And before Tuesday was out, those petitions had been filed, 2 of them by the Secretary of State and 1 of them from the House DFL leadership. And so on the second day of fake session on Wednesday, Harry Niska convened this rules committee work group and recommended that the taxpayer dollars get used to defend the Republicans in this court case. First of all, that good old fashioned corruption. The Democrats, the lawyers that we have on our side bringing this case to the Supreme Court, we are paying with from our campaign funds, not the taxpayer dollars. We have heard over and over this repetitiveness of the corruption, waste, fraud, and abuse coming from GOP. And I think they're hoping, the more times you say something, then hopefully it just becomes true in people's minds. Here is some fraud and corruption right here out in the open, because not only are they wanting to use taxpayer dollars to defend their illegal actions that have transpired since Tuesday, but the lawyers that they have retained are partners with Harry Niska at his law firm. You can't even make this stuff up. So Harry Niska's a lawyer.
Bald face in the sun corruption.
Just good old fashioned, except now that, everything is on YouTube and it's just doing it out in the open. And he says in his own words, as Andy's TikTok, R.I.P. TikTok.
May rest in peace. Yeah.
Oh man.
Now that Andy and I got a lot of views on TikTok, it's gone. I'm sure Trump will want to come and resurrect it because he's the one who initially was.
Kristi, you'll love this. Anna, my wife, said to me, "Hey, you got to get at this just in time for it not to matter."
Exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
Thanks, Anna. I really appreciate that.
So on Andy's TikTok, it was this he even played the clip from the 4.5-minute rules committee from Wednesday, where then Niska recuses himself because he says, these are my partners at my law firm. Like, they're not pretending, they're not hiding it.
No.
It is insane that there's that conflict of interest, not to mention these are taxpayer dollars. This is money all of us in Minnesota are spending on their defense. And I hope once this is found unconstitutional, that the Republican Party will pay back the coffers of the taxpayers of Minnesota. It is so outrageous and so just like out in the open, wild. Absolutely blows the mind.
Yeah, I think.
And it's a reflection of what the Republican Party is now under Trump. I think it's worth saying, like, the national picture of what this reflects is like, we're against government, but also we want all the government contracts and money for ourselves, completely twisting the people's house to help the rich and powerful remain rich and powerful, or richer and more powerful.
And just a blatant, delivery of kickbacks to business partners. And like you said, we're seeing that at the federal level with corporate CEOs that Trump is trying to implement right into our own government operations. And right here in Minnesota, it's just so blatant.
And we're probably not going to be able to talk about the inauguration very much, even on our midweek episode, because there's so much happening in Minnesota. But just on that point, at President Trump's inauguration, on the dais will be the 3 richest men in the world. Will be standing up there with another billionaire to celebrate him getting in office. Like, it is right in front of our faces that people who are already too rich and too powerful and have too much influence are celebrating that they know someone who is going to help them get even more rich and even more powerful, which means that the people and the working class have less and less of that money and power, is elected into office.
Yeah,
and that's just reflected in what Harry Niska did.
And I'll throw in here just real quick on that, having the 3 richest men present with Donald Trump, that just solidifies that the Trump, incoming Trump administration, Trump as a person and as a candidate, never had the best interest in mind of any American, any resident here, regardless of political party. CEOs who are raking in billions of dollars in profits on the backs of working people do not care what your politics are. They are just pandering to you to get elected, to have more power for themselves.
Yeah, he's just doing it for himself. And he thinks by buddying up with these billionaires, that's going to benefit him because of all his legal troubles and bankruptcies and all of those things. Like, this is not about the American people. This is about his self-servingness. And people are going to get hurt and go hungry and lose their homes and not get their benefits and die. And we're really focused on Minnesota, but this is also a microcosm for what we are seeing being just acceptable. It seems like more and more, and certainly from the MAGA base of the Republican Party.
And again, I think we touch back to what the Republicans are doing in our Minnesota House in their sham right now. What they did on day 3 after giving money for their defense from the public coffers straight to their leaders, or law career and buddies' coffers. They filed just 10 fake bills, because there's no official place to do bills, because there's no House of Representatives currently, but they did 10 fake bills. And it is this agenda. It is primarily economic conservatism, giving tax breaks to businesses, making sure they don't have to comply with things like earn sick and safe time, making sure that they have less taxes, and so there's less money for services, making the education strides we did, from things like universal school lunch all the way to some of our expanded programs to help with reading, completely modified, getting rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion across our government. So there's a sprinkling of sort of the culture war issues that people maybe their base might really care about, in quotes, while the rest of this stuff is happening right in front of their noses. At core of this, again, they're in Minnesota, particularly in the United States, in the election in November, obviously the majority of, at least how our elections define who should have power, they've been given the opportunity to do this. I think that's tragic, but it was a free and fair election. When we lose, I'll say it, and they're able to do this. But in Minnesota, they didn't. This is not what Minnesotans want. They did not give power in any of our branches of government. The closest in the Minnesota House, which is tied right now even in a huge national wave of Republican conservative sentiment, they could at best get a tie, and yet they're trying to ram down all of these things. And the reason is because it's not popular. People don't want this. They like most of the things that we did. Now, of course, every voter is going to have different ideas. That's what living in a community of people is. But for the most part, this is not popular. This is not what Minnesotans want. And that's why they have to do these extreme situations. And Kristi, like you said, at heart, the question is, who decides what public decisions are going to be made for the whole? Is it the people or is it politicians?
Right.
And the people as a whole, including the courts that represent them, including the many different executive offices, including the legislature, or the people who are there at the time, what they decide is best for them and their law partners.
Mm-hmm. Well put.
Yeah. And there's, as we said, there's a lot going on here. All of it's interconnected. The larger pieces and more important pieces being denying the processes of democracy that we have in place and denying checks and balances that have been in place since the beginning of American politics. And I'm going to take this opportunity to jump in. So for some folks who are a little more plugged in and maybe kind of noodling around these nuts and bolts of 133, 134, 67, 68, what's a quorum? For folks who are following along in that really strange, hypocritical logic loop that we're hearing, I just wanted to cover that as quickly as I can, and it might get a little messy and confusing, but I'll try to get there for everybody.
So now we're moving. Can I couch this real quick? Brion is like, what we're doing, what we're going to switch now to is like what we're doing about it. We already talked about the major thing, which is denying quorum, which makes everything that the Republicans are doing illegal and outside of the law. That's the main thing we're doing. And then we're working still towards when we eventually get into session, how we can best represent our people. So I know you guys were out everywhere. I was, at a local community college, we're doing work as well. But we're denying quorum. But the second thing that we are doing as a caucus is basically suing, bringing our case before the Supreme Court and saying, this is unconstitutional. They have no legal authority to do this. Stop them. And that is what Brion is going to describe. We'll probably get oral arguments are heard on Thursday of this week. Hopefully we're getting a decision on Thursday or Friday. That's our hope. But the details of that is specific, but I want to kind of table set, like that's what we're doing currently. And this is what this looks like. So sorry, Brion, to interrupt you, but take it away.
Yeah, so I think in the timeline, we might be right up about until last Friday. On January 17th, the Minnesota Supreme Court made the decision in the case regarding a special election in 40B in Roseville, Minnesota. So the governor had called for a special election in that district. The GOP filed a case stating that the governor called it too soon, that there are constitutional timelines to follow, and in addition that the candidate who ran and won that seat by election didn't actually have the authority to vacate that seat by writing a letter to the governor. And so this is really important now when we go back to day one of session. Day one of session, Secretary of State Steve Simon adjourned the session because there was no quorum, only 67 members were present. Now, the GOP went on with business as usual, stating that 67 of 133 members meets quorum under the Constitution. But after they declared that 67 of 133 is quorum, then they declared the vacancy in the 40B seat. So if we just stop and think about that, they've subtracted the same seat twice. It means that when the GOP took the gavel after Steve Simon adjourned, they said out loud, there are 133 members and we've got 67, so we're good. But we haven't actually vacated the 134th seat yet. So by this fact alone, they did not meet quorum of 68 of 134 members at the very start of their own fake session. So by the GOP's own admission through actions on day one and by the court rulings, there was no vacancy. So that puts us at 134 representative elects who received election certificates that were at the Capitol. So this is the point where members would have had the opportunity to refuse to seat any elected member. Democrats, had everyone shown up with a power agreement. This case in 40B happened. The ruling happened. Democrats certainly would have had the opportunity in joining Republicans in declaring a vacancy in 40B based on the court's ruling, right? That's not where things are at right now. And again, because the crucial part of all of this is Republicans will not confirm that they will seat Brad Tabke and honor the voters of Shakopee in 54A.
And not just Tabke, potentially every single one of us. There's no assurances that have been made.
No assurances whatsoever. And so we get, again, in this another hypocritical narrative that says we decide as the legislature. The people don't decide. The courts don't decide. And when we don't get what we want, we're going to use the courts, even though they should stay out of it. And when we want them to, then we'll use the courts. And then in that case, we're going to use taxpayer dollars to pay our own lawyer friends. You can't make this stuff up.
Y'all, this Republican math was hurting my brain. So I was like, Brion, would you please explain this part of the show? Because it boggles the mind. I mean, I identify very strongly with being an English major. So, like math isn't exactly my forte, but like I can survive when the math makes sense. And this, just none of this does. And so thanks, Brion, for trying to tackle Republican math, because it's clearly very special. It's a very special kind of math.
It is. But I will say ultimately, we are having a lot of conversations about numbers. Ultimately, this is about people and adequate representation of people. So I think even under that logic, 68 members of a body that's supposed to have 134 members, to me, that still would be quorum, regardless of party, throw the tie out of it, right? Think about if you have 134 seats and only 67 show up. I think for the benefit of Minnesotans, you still need that 68 member or more quorum to conduct business.
I got asked on my local radio station this week, where typically I go in and do weekly updates. And they said, well, what if the Supreme Court ruling next week, isn't in favor of the Democrats? And I said, we are now the party of law and order. We have been abiding by court decisions all along. Of course, we will abide by the Supreme Court decision that has never been in question. But what has been in question is whether the Republicans will. Because right now, like Brion said, there's one court decision up in Roseville that was favorable to our colleagues across the aisle. Oh, they're all in favor of that. There's another court decision that is not favorable to them in Shakopee. Oh, well, we're not going to abide by that. So it's sort of like we don't have assurances. And that's another reason why our staying out of the Capitol is a way to ensure that they will be people of their word. They will respect the will of the voters. And right now, we have none of those assurances. They're drunk on their own fake power right now.
Another point that I make to constituents as I'm talking about this, because we're all having conversations all the time, is about why is, and I might even said this on the last episode, so forgive me, listeners, if I have, why is quorum in the Constitution of the state of Minnesota? Constitutions are small documents, very legally binding, the highest form of legally binding law in our current system. Truly, you can read the whole Constitution in 25 minutes, depending on, give or take. So why is there a whole section on quorum? Why does it talk about this? And it's because it does protect that the majority of people are the ones who get to decide what happens in their government. And this goes way back to the founding. If you're a nerd like me, it's Federalist 10 in the Federalist Papers, where Madison talks about the importance of the rule of the majority. That's a foundation of our entire principle. And so we imagine the firestorm if the 67 elected DFL House members, we met in fill in the blank, Blaine, Minnesota, and we just all sat together in a room and started voting on stuff and making law. That would be equally outrageous to what the Republicans are currently doing, because we don't have enough of Minnesotans to say and make those rules, which is why we're not, by the way. That's why that's hypothetical, because we don't do that. And so to act as though we are the ones who would, as you said, Kristi, forestall true law and order is just inaccurate to what the situation truly is.
And in fact, I would say that it's our GOP colleagues who are not doing their jobs. And what we are seeing pop up in our little corners of the state is our county or our Senate district GOP groups are threatening recall elections on, it's a handful of us right now, and they're threatening to do it to all 67 of us. And I find that fascinating. I think we've seen they're learning their lessons from their leader in chief, MAGA Donald Trump, who goes on the offensive with court cases and trying to use every avenue possible to try to gain power. And so instead of just waiting to respond, they're going on the attack. And I would argue we are doing our jobs, A, by not going into the chamber to deny quorum to this illegal power grab, and B, we continue to do the work we've been doing all interim since the end of May, which is working on legislation, talking with partners, coordinating our Senate authors, working on drafts of bills, not to mention the work we do in our communities, which is having conversations, meeting with constituents, emailing folks back, getting tours of places that are asking for money or, wanting bonding bills, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, we are doing that work. And I would argue the people who are not doing their work right now are the people who are pretend playing house in
Correct.
our chamber.
They're not even coming to the negotiating table anymore in actual power sharing.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. They just say well, this is good enough. And when I've had pushback to say, well, you guys, you got to enact your agenda the last 2 years. What's the difference? And the difference is majority.
We were voted in a majority.
You had a majority. We had the will of the people to do that. And that is not something that Republicans currently have. In fact, in our chamber, Democrats don't have it either. So we have been saying all along, and whenever there's a news article or something saying Republicans and Democrats disagree of who should be in the majority, I write to the editors and I say, absolutely not. We have never once claimed to be in the majority. We have claimed we are in a tie. We are in a tie-ority to share power. That has never been a thing we have, the Democrats have claimed. That's a cited claim.
I would even go a step further and say that Democrats have acknowledged an imbalance in parties because of the situation that's gone on in Roseville and 40B, understanding that we could be at a 67-6. Democrats are fully willing and laid on the table for Republicans to operate as a majority until that election's over. And we were told no.
And now we don't know when that election is going to be. We know that it will not be a week from Tuesday on January 28th, but we're waiting for the rest of the court ruling to figure out when that special election indeed will take place.
So this might be a good transition. If you remember at the end of last episode and on socials, particularly on Blue Sky, I've been asking, and we've been asking people for their questions, if they have any particular questions we can answer on this episode. And I have a couple that I'm going to throw at you all if you're ready.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure thing.
Okay, so how far can Republicans conceivably push this coup? The Senate/Governor Walz wouldn't let any bills they try to pass become law, right? So they're basically non-functional despite pretending quorum doesn't exist. How much can they do and still pretend to be functional House of Representatives?
I feel like we're going to see that. I don't know that anyone has the answer, but it seems like they're prepared to go pretty damn far.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing so far is that Republicans are willing to operate as if they're the only elected officials that matter in Minnesota, and that their voters are the only people's opinions who matter, and that nobody else belongs at the tables at the Capitol that are, happening right now. And like Andy was describing at the beginning of that episode, all of the things that are happening that are being advertised as legitimate House business is not. It's all fake. Everything that happened after Steve Simon adjourned on January 14th is null and void. So that's what I expect, is that Republicans will still continue on as if they are the only members of the House of Representatives and pass whatever they want. Meanwhile, demanding that we come back and play nice somehow, which we're still willing to do after all this, by the way. We're still wanting to come back and play nice. But, they're going to continue to try to do everything they can. But again, these are all attempts because none of it is legitimate.
And I think it's worth also saying that any time that this faux, fake House of Representatives has interacted with any other form of our government, they have not been recognized. So Steve Simon is the Secretary of State. He's part of the executive branch. And in Minnesota, if you don't know, that is an elected position. So he was elected to that position and has been for, I think, over a decade now, right? 2014 was his first term, maybe. So he's been voted on many, many times representing the people as our Secretary of State. He ruled they did not have a quorum, that they were wrong, and that's why he adjourned. And the case that the Secretary of State brought before the Supreme Court was represented by the Attorney General, which is also an elected position here in the state of Minnesota. This faux House of Republicans voted, I think it was on Wednesday, it might have been Thursday, to let the governor and the House know that, the governor and the Senate know that the House was duly organized, which is what we would normally do if it actually was. And both of those bodies rejected and did not accept that. Both the governor, they sent 4 guys literally just to go over to the governor's office and be like, hey, we're organized, which is not how it's normally done, but that's what they did. And that was not recognized as legitimate. And the Senate, which, by the way, is in a tie currently, 33-33, also did not receive it. The Republicans, I'm actually grateful for in the Senate, didn't recognize that petition. So they're trying to push, and no form of our legitimate government is recognizing them. And I think that's important to say over and over and over. Next question is, what do you think is their long-term goal here? Are they hoping Democrats or another government body will concede in some way and they'll be able to actually steal power? Or is this just posturing to make Democrats look bad? Obviously, we don't know the answer to this question, but what do you guys think is the long-term goal?
Brion?
There's a couple ways to go to answer this question. One, I could simply answer it with a yes, that all of those things are possible, trying to grab power and all of the above. The other answer is that this is ill thought out and there is not a long-term goal. This is a very reactive group of people who are unhappy with things that are happening and trying to pull levers where they don't exist in order to get their way. That's how I see it. And, we're relying on the court system, which, by the way, is the system of checks and balances on the other 2 branches of government. That is the way that we should be following this. So yeah, I don't know if there's a long game here. Kind of seems like there isn't because we keep running into all these loopholes. But if there was a long game, I'd say it'd be to take advantage of people of Minnesota.
And I think we'll find out. History will be the judge. And I think that there's a lot of frustration with the trifecta the last 2 years, more conservative Minnesotans, saying, whoa, we went too far. And so that is the tenor with which we're seeing our colleagues try to grab power that wasn't legally given to them. And really the only people who will be able to correctly assess if this power grab and if all this posturing and play acting was worth it is going to be the voters. And I alluded to this in a previous podcast, but when this same opportunity presented itself to the Republicans in 1979, their leadership was thinking far in advance and said that it would be folly because it's our party today who would suffer under this, but it's their party today, but it might be our party next time. Just like this is, a Brad Tabke race right now that they are disputing, but could be any one of us. And if we don't agree on the basis of the rule of law, then we're up a creek with no paddle. And so I think it's really just going to be that long term. If people can understand, because it's very complex and it's nuanced and nobody should have to do this.
The details are quite complex. Yeah.
Yes. And regular people shouldn't have to be worrying themselves with this. And we need to just, follow the law, follow the Constitution, and get on with the people's business because it is becoming such a thing. I mean, we are keenly aware of the optics and the narratives, and also don't give a fuck because we're also just but this is the right thing to do. Yeah. And this is the thing we have to do to preserve our republic and our democracy. And especially, I think, with a Trump administration coming into power, we absolutely think it is important enough for us to show up and claim the power that the people gave us in order to then be able to defend against whatever's coming down from Washington, D.C. They don't like that we protected trans people. They don't like that we think immigrants, belong here and are valuable parts of our communities. All of these marginalized people that we have worked really, really hard to protect. that's why we're not going to work, is because we don't know what's going to happen from the federal government, but these sham bills that they dropped already and the rhetoric that we have heard from our colleagues, oh, hell no. Like, we're going to do whatever it takes to protect Minnesotans from this kind of tyranny.
Yeah, and I think,
So well said.
with presented with, as an outsider, if I were an outsider, if I'm going to try to be one, if I'm presented with two teams of people, one team says, we have a position where we can just go in and start kicking out other members that were elected for this other team. Are you all in? Let's do it. And the other team says, we've heard what the other team's plan is, and this isn't okay. They can't execute it if we don't show up. That seems like the right thing to do. I know I'm biased, but I would pick that second team any day over a team of people who have just firmly decided together that rules don't matter and they should be able to kick out whoever they want.
100%. And I think, as you both just alluded to, like, we can't view this outside of the rising authoritarianism in our country. Because at heart of authoritarianism is the idea of what is happening is scary. You should be very afraid. And the only way that we can get through this is if you give me unfettered power. And if you don't go by the systems that have kept you safe for this entire time, if you give me all the power. That is what authoritarianism does. And people, because they're scared, because they're afraid, because they don't understand what's happening, comply with that or actively take part in that. And that's kind of what the Republicans are sort of hoping for, is that, as Kristi said, these optics look like this is unknowable and, whatever else, part of this heightened environment. Just like, let us figure it out. We'll figure it out for you. And implicit as that is a giving up of the power of the people. And history tells us again and again, when that happens, at best, a few people get very, very rich and very, very powerful, and the rest are much worse off. At worst, people start recreating the world in their image, and that means some people don't fit in that image, and those people get incredibly hurt, thrown off, destroyed, taken away rights, whatever. And so that we're fighting a small bit of that battle here in Minnesota to make that not the case.
It's not great.
Not great. Last
great.
question, and this is like the overwhelming question I got from people across different platforms was like, so what? So what can we do? Like, you all are legislators, you're doing stuff, but like, what do I do? What would you say to those people, Kristi?
Well, some things I found helpful and in talking to just my friends who are worried for all of our safety and sanity. And I know I wasn't sleeping great this week. And people who absolutely believe, see us, believe in our cause, want to support us. I'm saying, you could email with that sentiment, because they're telling me in person, they're telling me at the grocery store, they're telling me at my kids' school. And I know that I have the support of my community. And, like with the threat of a recall, I'm like, bring it. Just won that election 2 months ago. So let's go. But when I'm the only one who hears it, I'm like, put it in an email, call my office, because it's always the case. And we know that when people are upset, we get more response from the people who are upset. But it's just as important to register your support as well in a formal way, so that when we say, which we have all experienced, my constituents want me to not show up. And if we don't have the receipts, it's harder to say that, even though we've had the conversations. So that's one super easy thing and way to do that. And also be showing your support on social media, be going to the Capitol and protest of all the fake committees. Certainly, if you're asked to testify or show up for one of these, again, quotation fingers, committees, these work groups, to not waste your time because they're not legit. So there's ways of both showing up and not showing up that is absolutely supportive of our theory of the case. And again, we will hear hopefully in like 5 days, hopefully from the Supreme Court, what their ruling is on this.
And I would say, just to echo, email your representative, whoever that is, not just like the three of us. If it is a Republican, be respectful, but also say, I think this is wrong. What you are doing, unlawful, unconstitutional. Stop this sham, House of Representatives. If you're represented by a Democrat, even in the bluest heart of Minneapolis, send them an email and saying, thank you for
Absolutely.
standing up for my voice and my vote. I appreciate it. Thank you. It doesn't have to be long, but it's truly powerful when you're a public official. Because, as Kristi said, the vast majority of our email are people on some spectrum of upset or wanting something to change drastically or feeling very outdone by government, because that's just generally a human nature thing to do. So every so often a positive email means a lot. Brion?
Yeah, and I would just throw in to add very clear questions, if you have them, in your communications with your representative. So if you have a representative who is on the side of kicking out duly elected members, ask them. Ask them in an email to their official account, hey, do you plan on doing this or not? What's happening? And of course, be respectful about it. And at the same time, if you're, I should just always be respectful, is one key takeaway there. I don't know how other folks, sort of draw the line of where replies get sent out or not. But if I get an email or a phone call that is very clearly out of anger, that is not coming from a place of genuine curiosity or wanting to have a civil conversation, I'm not as excited, or, I'm not going to prioritize a response to a conversation that is just meant to intimidate me or berate me. I'm open to conversations with people who are open. So express that in your messages and share your responses.
I think that is a great place to leave it. Our recording schedule this week is going to be pretty fluid. Again, generally, we have planned that every Wednesday you will get an episode dropped in your feeds. Obviously, if you're hearing this, it's probably on Monday when it drops, and we're planning probably to drop at least one more this week, depending on the Supreme Court case or if other things happen. So we'll be around, and as always, we really, really need y'all to help us get the word out about this podcast. Like, share, subscribe, verbally tell your friends. There's some weird stuff going on. Did you read that Trib article? Check out this podcast. It's in simpler language or whatever. It really, really helps. And that's why we're doing this, is because we want to better communicate to the people of Minnesota.
And because now that Andy and I are TikTok stars and now TikTok has gone away, we need to really feed our egos another way. I didn't even have a chance to figure out how to monetize that stuff. So damn, like, subscribe, share with your friends, please.
Yeah.
Get the word out.
Maybe TikTok will come back. Kristi had her biggest TikTok moment, and guys, she is so sad. Like, it was a great video. How many? You had 120,000 views?
70 at least.
Look at that.
Well, you were like 270,000.
I wasn't going to, I don't keep track. It was 310,000.
Oh,
before TikTok went down.
And I'm pretty sure I have a TikTok account. Maybe.
I think in our group chat, I think Brion did just one time say, do I need to learn TikTok?
And we were both like, I don't know. We don't know.
And I think I said a month ago, I would have said, yeah, right now, don't worry about it.
No.
Broadcasting from the brink, everybody.
That's right.
Podcasting from the brink. You have now heard from the new Libs. Now go out on the block.
Bye.